We see some major changes in the 1920s. One of the biggest is the fact that we see a real major shift in the makeup of where our population was living. While many people used to live in these very isolated and rural or country communities, now we're seeing more and more people who are living in larger towns. In those isolated rural communities, people are very aware of everything going on around them. They know everyone else's business. There's very tightly controlled values because there's a tremendous amount of accountability. And in most of those communities, you've got these very high standards with a lot of religious morality, meaning people really adhere to these basic sets of beliefs. And if you didn't, everyone knew about it. So the fact that more and more people are moving to these larger communities and larger cities is going to start to change their moral values because really they could. They had the ability and they had the means to be able to kind of step outside those once very rigid values without anybody knowing about it. So there's a lot less control over that entire community. And this very fast-paced kind of life is going to alter the way people do things and the way they think, the way they feel, and the way they behave as well. So this is going to be really different for a lot of Americans who are now kind of changing what they had always done. The business of America is business. This is really going to be Calvin Coolidge's kind of slogan for the 1920s and really shows you where our focus is in the United States. The automobile specifically is really going to alter people's lives. They now have the freedom to travel, whereas, if you think back before World War I, most people had never traveled more than 50 miles from their hometown. Now they had the ability to go just about as far as they wanted to. It was really going to be very enlightening. It's also going to allow cities to grow. And not so much grow, but to spread out. And that's what we call that urban sprawl. People now did not have to live within walking distance of public transportation. They could now get in their cars and drive, from their homes outside the cities or in, what we now call the suburbs into town. So we are going to see the automobile really change the way that people live. Airlines are going to develop. Remember, we saw back before the World War I, we saw planes were used for delivering the mail, and they were used to fight in World War I. But during this point in time, you're going to actually start to see people who use that for specifically travel. Electricity is going to become widely available all across the country using Tesla's alternating current, which was different from Edison's direct current. And we also see the radio industry grow as well. So the radio, again, was very key because it's going to connect our entire nation. Everybody in the 1920s seemed to be doing very well. Their economic situation and standard of living seemed to rise, everyone except farmers. During World War I, farmers had increased their harvest, they'd increased their crops, they went into debt to buy more land so they could grow more crops and support our soldiers in World War I. And what happens is that when the war is over, they no longer have that guaranteed buyer in the American government for their soldiers. So you see farmers are not going to make that adjustment and they are going to be in a lot of debt. So farmers have falling prices on their crops and are not doing well, whereas everyone else really was. The advertising industry is going to grow at this point too. They're going to start targeting more specific individuals to buy crops. Productivity, meaning we're growing more crops and we are also making more products at a much faster rate. The installment plan, the development of the installment plan is going to really change things as well. The installment plan means you're going to go into a store, you're going to take something, you're going to put a small down payment on it, take the product home with you, and then make payments over time. That really increases consumption because whereas people might not could afford to buy a large item, what they can do is make payments on that item. We also see a shift because of the stock market. For the first time in history, the stock market was attracting your ordinary people to invest in it. So whereas before it was really only your very wealthy who were investing in the stock market, you see ordinary Americans investing in it at this point as well. That's going to be a big change. Henry Ford also brings change to the industry. He's going to incorporate the assembly line into his production of cars, which is going to greatly increase the production time and a lot of times quality of his products. He's also going to introduce a really revolutionary idea, which was the fact that his workers could be consumers as well if he paid them enough, which he did. He paid them $5 a day, which at this point in time was really unheard of. So what that means is that he was paying his workers enough so that they could actually buy the cars they were producing. Not only does this increase the number of consumers that Ford would have, it's also going to increase the quality, because they realized that he could increase the quality because those workers could possibly be making their own vehicle. So they're going to do a better job. Women are going to undergo transformation in the 1920s as well. The Victorian age view of women was that women should be relegated to the home, that they should be only focused on taking care of their husband and children. During the 1920s, women are going to start to see a shift. Many of them had worked in factories and outside of the home during World War I. So now a lot of them begin to reject those very old-fashioned values. The term flapper is used to describe these new young women of these modern times. They're going to change their hairstyles into bob hairstyles. They're going to change their dress. They're going to change their attitudes and behaviors and begin to challenge that double standard of behavior. That means double standard means it was okay for men to behave and act in a certain way, not okay for women. They begin to challenge those ideas. You do see a major clash with those conservative values as well. So whereas there were many who believed that they wanted to push those boundaries, they're obviously going to be pushed back from those conservatives who believe that these women were behaving in an inappropriate way. We also see opportunities increase for many women in the 1920s, and partly because their families were changing. Margaret Sanger is going to be important because she introduces birth control clinics. These were really unheard of at the time. In fact, it was really obscene for women to talk about. But Margaret Sanger believed that women could never fully be independent if they could not control their reproduction. So she is going to introduce these birth control clinics. With the introduction of prohibition with the 18th Amendment, we're going to see many changes in the United States. Remember, this is the amendment that's going to ban the sale and consumption of alcohol. Many people had a really hard time with the 18th Amendment because this is the first and only amendment that really tried to regulate a behavior, especially behavior that could be done behind closed doors in the privacy of their own homes. The other problem with this amendment is that the government never really tried to enforce the law. They said the law was there, but even presidents during Prohibition had alcohol in the White House. So this is one that was going to have a very hard time being enforced. You're going to see speakeasies develop. These are going to be secret drinking clubs that are going to pop up all over where people could go, just like clubs or bars today, but they were just more secretive. And people were still drinking alcohol. So there's going to be a whole group of people that are going to emerge to provide people with the alcohol they still wanted to buy. The people who are going to transport all of that are going to be called bootleggers. They're the people who would get the illegally made alcohol and transport it from place to place. We also see the growth of organized crime because there were, again, people who were still consuming alcohol, who were still selling alcohol. So you had to have that organization that was going to be able to keep up with all of this. And remember, these gangs and organized crime, it is a business. There was a lot of money involved. Now, Al Capone, who you see pictured on the right here, he is going to be one of the most famous mobsters during the 1920s. He finally, out of all the crimes he ever committed, he finally gets caught on tax evasion and finally goes to prison for tax evasion, even though he committed numerous crimes. Fundamentalism is going to make a resurgence in the 1920s. Fundamentalism is this religious movement that believed in the absolute truth of the Bible. So every word in the Bible was to be taken literally. You had famous evangelists like Amy Semple McPherson and Billy Sunday who are going to be out preaching this particular very fundamentalist Christianity. But at the same time in the 1920s, you see Darwin's theory of evolution, even though it had been around for a long time, it was now starting to be taught in your mainstream schools. A small town in Tennessee is going to pass a law that prohibited the teaching of evolution in schools. There was a man by the name of John Scopes who teaches evolution anyway, and when he does, he's arrested and it goes to trial. When it goes to trial, your two famous attorneys are going to be Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan. And these two gentlemen are going to both argue very passionately over teaching evolution and whether or not teachers should be allowed to teach this to school children. The significance of this court case really falls down to religious fundamentalism versus scientific modernism, and the whole idea of whether or not we should be sticking to these values of our past or be looking for the future. So we really have a big contradiction here and a big debate over these two things. At this point in time, they certainly didn't believe they could coexist or operate at the same time, especially in our schools.